Thank you very much, and thank you to the Scientific Committee for giving me the opportunity to talk today. What I want to do is give you a fairly quick tour of our approach to behaviour change by touching on the underlying theory, talking a little bit about the kinds of data we collect, and then just a case study in efficacy. So to begin with, the theoretical underpinning is based on two things, cognitive behaviour consistency, and Ruth in fact has given me a nice introduction to this, and the theory of planned behaviour. The cognitive behaviour consistency approach that Albert Bandura takes, which is to say that in social cognition there's a kind of reciprocal relationship between the three elements of personal determination, environmental determinants and behavioural determinants. And the key part of that is the reciprocal nature of that. The theory of planned behaviour, and I'm sorry this is such a busy slide, but I can summarise it pretty quickly. The left-hand box basically says that there are a whole range of antecedent factors to attitudes, which include education and cultural factors and knowledge and so on. But these are expressed in the attitudes we hold, and in particular, the beliefs we have about the kinds of behaviour that we engage in, the beliefs we have about what others might expect us to do in the particular situation, and the beliefs that we have about our efficacy, that is to say, our capacity to execute, what we want to do. And that they lead to an intended behaviour, which in turn, all things, being satisfied, to an actual outcome behaviour. So that's the theory we're based on. Our particular read on that in the livestock industry, and I should say that unlike a lot of these cases we've been hearing about today, this is a kind of a captive audience because we're dealing with stock people who work in a specific industry, therefore are accessible, and to whom we've, can deliver a very specific behaviour change message. But basically, the stock person components in the model are attitudes and behaviour, a la planned behaviour. That the outcomes of the stock person behaviour manipulate or affect the fear response of the animal, which is expressed in behaviour, is expressed in physiological stress responses and so on. And that in turn leads to welfare and productivity outcomes. Welfare because it compromises the animal reproductively in terms of its immune system and so on. And productivity because it affects its ability to produce whatever the particular outcome for that livestock species is. So what we wanted to do is to use data that we've collected that identifies the specifics of each of those steps in the model and apply them to behaviour change. And the model that we've used is a cognitive behavioural approach. It has its antecedents in cognitive behavioural therapy that's used in psychology, but applied to a non-therapeutic environment. And basically, what it does is it targets the beliefs that underlie the behaviour, attitudes, and the behaviour in question, and particularly the reciprocal relationship between those that we've derived from Bandura's conception of the relationship between these things. And then, as we've heard in many talks, maintaining those changed behaviours. In terms of measuring attitudes, there are numerous ways that you can do this. What we have chosen to do is to mainly target beliefs, and the reason for that is that although we could measure affective beliefs, that is to say whether people like or dislike something or think whether something's good or bad. The problem with that is that we can't ask a person, do you think it's good to belt your animal, right? Or to injure an animal or something like that, because clearly you'll get a socially desirable response. If, however, we say it is necessary to use a lot of force to move a pig along a corridor, that's a belief statement, and it depends on whether they think pigs are, smart or stupid, or whether they are compliant or non-compliant. But whatever it is, they will vary widely in their beliefs about the need for that. Okay. The behavioural change strategy, and you've heard elements of this, I think, throughout the two days so far. Partly it involves imparting knowledge and skills. That's the cognitive element of it. We've got to explain to them what the science tells us about the situation. We have to change habits. We've heard a fair bit about that too. Altering well-established attitudes and beliefs. There's this whole problem of dissonance that you've got to deal with, which we've heard about before. Targeting denial, offence, counter-arguments and so on. And the way we do that is to professionalise the message. That is to say, we say to people, our science has told us that there's a particular class of behaviours which have been used routinely with livestock that turn out to be detrimental to the animal. And so we're giving you access to this new knowledge so you can apply it in your situation, much in the same way as you would apply a message about nutrition or a new vaccine or whatever. Okay? We prepare the person to handle stressful situations where they might revert to their habitual behaviour, or situations where their workmates may, through normative pressure, try and get them to revert to the practice that they have known and become accustomed to in the workplace. And one of the ways of doing that is to make sure that management has been trained as well, and all of the people that work in the particular facility are trained as well. Okay? It's, in other words, to try and get a culture change as part of the process. So the kinds of beliefs that we target are things like the sensitivity of pigs to handling. I'm using pigs as an example, where we would go through the sensory capacities of pigs, their intelligence and so on, okay? And the way that they react, what the science tells us about how they react to different kinds of handling. The importance of these positive interactions. By petting, I mean, hand resting on the back or scratching behind the ear, those kinds of things. The importance of avoiding excessive effort, that you don't need to use a lot of effort. In fact, it makes handling more difficult. It stresses the pig, that sort of thing. All of that, we give the science to back it up. So it's an expert's view on what the consequence of these things are for the animal. The one thing I didn't mention is that we then go on to show them, again based on the science, what we know about the effect that not only it has on the animal but production. And this is, again, we've heard this before, this gives a lever, if you like, for them to be interested in the improved welfare because it actually improves the economics of their production. When we target behaviour, we teach them to identify the difference between positive and negative interactions because it's not that obvious. When does a pat become a hit? Okay, the sort of thing we would say is if it's audible, then it's negative. Okay, if it's that, then it's positive. And simple guidelines like that, plus videos and all the rest of it to illustrate it. We talk about minimising negative interactions because occasionally under certain circumstances, for example, when they're at risk or some other situation, they may in fact have to use a small amount of force. But generally speaking, that should be minimised and to maximise positive interactions when the opportunity arises. We target animal behaviour. Again, we've heard a bit about this in various contexts today, so that they know how to recognise fear responses in pigs, because it may not be all that obvious to many of them. And so we make sure that they know how to do that and that they use feedback from that to gauge their own behaviour. Following that, and again, these principles have been elucidated in the last couple of days, we have ways of maintaining page. We have these We have these posters which they put up in the tea room in the facility, and they rotate them periodically, so there's an element of novelty about them. And in fact, we've seen these posters up in these places years after they've been through the training program, so we know they're used. We send out newsletters where we have a little questionnaire about asking them about, have they been able to change their behaviour, what difficulties have they faced, that sort of stuff, And also we have a follow-up training program which they can use 6 to 12 months later, or in fact as often as they feel necessary. I'm just going to give you a quick run through an example of the implementation of that sort of program. And this is one that was done in the pig industry, where what we did is we recruited 30 farms, owner-operated farms, so small units up to about 500 sows. Doesn't sound that small, but it's relatively small. And what we did is we randomly assigned them to two groups. So this is a randomised control study. Okay, so half went into an intervention study where we're going to train them using this methodology I've just talked about, and a control where we just go and discuss the weather with the farmer, or pork prices or something, but not go through the program. Prior to the intervention, we measured all 4 components of the fishbone model. So their attitudes, we monitored their behaviours by doing on-farm observations of what they were doing when they were handling pigs. Animal behaviour, we had a standardised way of doing that by setting up an arena on farm, introducing pigs and looking at their approach behaviour to a person. And productivity, we measured the output from the farm for the previous 12 months. Okay? When we ran the program, what we found was that there was a significant improvement in attitudes. I've just given the example, the beliefs about these positive contacts. So the intervention group had a significantly higher attitude towards those things. Stockperson behaviour, that the frequency with which the negative interactions occurred had reduced from 55 to 38%. Still seems a bit high, but nevertheless a significant improvement. And you might say, well, in that case, by the time we came to do the follow-up, the people knew what we were doing, okay? So you'd think there'd be a socially desirable element in that. But when you look at the animal-based indicators, what you find is that their approach behaviour decreased, that is to say that, their time near the experimenter increased, that is to say they showed less fear, and they didn't know what was going on, and their production improved, okay? So what we did is then to use that to develop a cognitive behaviour program based on these principles. And it's actually a computer-based program which at the beginning gives the participant a questionnaire, an attitude questionnaire, and then later in the program gives them some feedback of where they stand on their attitudes relative to their peers in the industry. We have a database embedded in the program based on our data collection, so that they can do some sort of personal evaluation of where they are. And the program gives them some personalised feedback on what this might mean for the risks of them not handling their animals well. Okay, and there's about 4 or 5 different classes of attitude that we look at there. We've just recently put this online, and we're currently trialling to see how well that works rather than doing it as kind of a facilitated computer-based intervention. Okay, thank you.